Looks like people are starting to filter in, and Matt, I'll pass it over to you.
Okay, excellent. Should I wait another 30 seconds?
We'll wait a little bit. Let people pop in from the waiting room.
Okay. I can't actually see people filtering in.
Sure. Down there at the bottom, you might see something that says participants. Okay. You can click on that, and then you'll see it off to the right.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay, I'm with you. Okay, all right. Well, I'll kick it off then, shall I? Well, hello everyone, and welcome along to the AI Media Advocacy Summit Photographers Panel. My name is Matt Growcoot, and I will be moderating today's discussion. Now, roughly 1 year ago, I became the news editor at petapixel.com. And in that time, generative AI has gone from a relatively unknown niche technology to becoming a fully fledged medium with proponents and critics. Now, I assume that most of you watching will already know about the incredible capabilities of AI image generators. DALL-E, Midjourney, and Stable Diffusion have trained their image synthesizer models by doing an almighty scrape of the internet, which included taking millions of copyrighted photos without asking permission from the photographers. Today, I have 3 experts from the photography industry who concern themselves with copyright, business, and authenticity. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So, Jeff, do you want to go first?
You're muted, Jeff.
Rookie mistake. I'm Jeff Sedlik. I'm a photographer and director. I am the president and CEO of the Plus Coalition, which is an organization focusing on the communication and management of rights information and descriptive information for visual works, including photographs and other types of visual works. That's at plus.org for anyone who would like to know more. And I also teach at the Art Center College of Design.
Yeah, Tom?
Sure. Hi, I'm Tom Maddrey. I'm the Chief Legal Officer and Head of National Content and Education for the American Society of Media Photographers. We're a photography trade association. It's been around since 1944, representing creators and creators' rights all that time, specifically in the area of copyright. I do a lot of work in the courts at various levels, fighting for the rights of creators and assisting photographers with all the legal challenges that they face.
And finally, Santiago?
Yeah, hi, Santiago Lyon. I head up advocacy and education for the Content Authenticity Initiative, which is an Adobe-led cross-industry community seeking to create and implement an open source standard around provenance, or the origins of digital files. So we're all about authenticity and transparency. And prior to that, I was a media executive at the Associated Press for almost 15 years, running their global photo department. And before that, a photographer in the field for 20 years, including a decade covering war and conflict around the world.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, Jeff, I'm going to come to you first. I want to ask you, what are the biggest issues that photographers are facing right now in the generative AI space?
There is a big question. I should say also that I'm here on behalf of the Advertising or American Photographic Artists, the APA. I'm the former national president of that organization. There are perceived challenges and there are real challenges. I think that the perception by many is that the sky is falling, and for some it actually is. And for others, this is a new beginning. And it's important that we all keep in mind and understand that this is, even though AI has been around for quite a long time, and AI ML as well, its rapid spread in the last months and year or so is unprecedented, but it's only the beginning of what's going to happen. We're going to see these tools mature, and we'll see capabilities that we are not even considering right now, some of which could be very, very useful to visual artists, others of which may threaten the sustainability for some in the profession, or for many in the profession, who will have to adapt and learn how to sustain their businesses in a variety of ways. But this is nothing new for visual artists. Visual artists have been struggling with their business model for some years as technology advances and opens the door to people who may not have the same level of mastery, technical mastery, or creative capabilities as others, but are able to create visual art and quite good visual art. When it comes to AI, the question for many is, are they actually creating that visual art? And I'm sure we'll get into this later, but for some, the creativity involved in in generating an AI work is the equivalent of ordering a pizza and then claiming that you created that pizza. But for others, they take the generated work as a starting point, and they bring it offline and do amazing things with that work. Did they actually create or author that first generated image, or even the iterations of it, by prompting the system from a legal standpoint? Probably not. But taking that and using it as a starting point to then create greater works in which they exercise what's called selection and coordination and arrangement of multiple elements and create their work from that, probably so. I think that the primary threat, or a couple of the primary threats, are one, our work is being used to train AI systems without our consent, and copyright may or may not be our friend there, because without substantial similarity, it's a difficult thing to prove that there's an infringement there. Two, I think that the ongoing practice currently of finding images on the web through Google searches or what have you, and then uploading them as image prompts to these systems, thereby submitting those images to systems that are then going to rely on those images for other things without the knowledge or consent of the creator, and also resulting in the creation of works that are substantially similar, or can be substantially similar, recognizable as one work being derived from the other, depending on which system you're using and which part of the tool you're using, is really problematic, because the derivative work, the right to adapt our work, is one of the core rights afforded us under copyright law. And with that, I could go on, right? But everybody has really valuable input here, so I'll stop for the moment.
Okay. So Tom, can you tell us a little bit about the training data sets? And photographers are finding the pictures in data sets such as the Lyon 5B one. What do you advise photographers do when they find their work in one of these data sets?
Well, I think that there's a couple things that we want to keep in mind. One, as Jeff was indicating, we're just at the nascent edge of technology being at a point where this is a widespread practice, but it's accelerated so incredibly quickly. And what you're saying is correct. Photographers are finding their work through either various websites and other ways to check if their work has been included in these data sets. And they're finding their work in places that they didn't give permission for their work to be. It's a core principle of copyright law here in the US and in most places, that you own that copyright from the minute you create the work, and you're the one that gets to determine when that work is reproduced and when it's displayed, and as Jeff was saying, when derivative works are created from it. And so what you have is a whole number of photographers, and professional photographers in particular, who make their living off of licensing their work for other people to use them, right? Companies contact the members of our organizations and hire photographers to either create new work on assignment, or they might buy work that the photographer has already created. But the whole point is that the photographer is granting that permission. What we're talking about here is when work that is simply taken without a license, without permission, and put into AI training sets that then are going to create the types of works that we've all seen. You know, I think that what a photographer should do is a bit of an open question at the moment. It's very easy in other scenarios when you've been, quote, infringed, to know what the next steps are, right? But here we have a number of lawsuits that are going on, not only in the US, but around the world. Probably the largest of which is the Getty Images versus Stable Diffusion lawsuit that was filed about a month ago. First, a version of it was filed in the UK and then here in the US. And in that case, it's very interesting what Getty is saying. Getty is saying, hey, this AI training set took all of the images that Getty had online, and you might say, well, how can you prove that? How do you know that? And it's pretty shocking to take a look when you see that the AI generated images retain in a garbled and but clearly recognizable format the Getty Images watermark that was on there. That's it's pretty hard to refute that the work you have came from that original work. You know, I think that a good thing that photographers can do is stay on top of some of the changes that are coming to the ability in software, and I think we're going to talk about some of this here in a little bit, but the ability to have some additional layers of control over how your work is used. I will tell you very specifically at ASMP, we are having discussions with our members and with the industry professionals to determine if these types of clauses should be put in standard photography contracts and licensing agreements. That that the work that's being created is not eligible or you are not giving inherent permission for these things. Now, I know there's some even cleaner solutions that I think Jeff and Santiago are working on as well.
Yes, well, that does bring me to Santiago, because you are working on something that's very, very interesting. It's regarding content authenticity. And proving the provenance of an image. Now, I would really like to, I'm sure everyone would like to hear what exactly it is that you're working on. Can you envision a world where AI images can be easily labeled as such, and that everyone would be can easily know or find out that an AI image is computer generated and wasn't actually taken at the hands of a photographer? Will we get this utopia?
Well, I'm working, as I mentioned, on something called the Content Authenticity Initiative, which Adobe started in late 2019, together with the New York Times and at that time, Twitter, around the provenance, establishing the provenance or the origins of digital files and determining how they were created, on what devices they were created, what changes they might have undergone in the editing process, and then sharing some or all of that information with the relevant parties. It's really all about transparency. And so to that end, we're working with camera and smartphone manufacturers on the hardware end, meaning that, you know, in the not too distant future, it's likely that when you buy a hardware device, it'll come out of the box with this technology on it, and you as the user can choose to activate it or not. If you do activate it, it does a couple of things. It secures the, you know, existent metadata fields that most devices generate, EXIF data and those kinds of things that show you the technical details, time, date, location of when an image was generated. And then the other thing that it does in the editing side of things, because it's an open source initiative, We're working with a broad, cross-industry community of vendors. But on the editing side of things, what it does is it creates secure layers of metadata that reflect any changes that are made to a digital file in the editing process. And those metadata fields are then either embedded in the file or housed in the cloud with a pointer from the file to the cloud. And then we're working with publishing systems and publishers to leave that metadata intact with a view to making it visible to the consumer. And so it's really about establishing the provenance and the transparency around the images. With regards to AI, which, as you mentioned, is a relatively new and fast-moving area, we're looking at two things specifically here. We're working with some of the major companies that are, generating AI or making the engines to generate AI to see if we can get their output labeled as having been generated by AI. So using that same secure metadata that we were developing before the advent of this technology, you can imagine a scenario where you put in a text prompt into a Gen AI creator, and it comes out saying this image was made with version whatever of DALL-E 2 or Stable Diffusion or whatever program you're using. That's one thing. The second thing is around the data training sets. As has been indicated, there's been a, let's say, somewhat cavalier behavior on part of these companies scraping stuff off the internet. There's probably a couple of years at least of pending litigation and lawsuits to try and figure it all out. But we're also exploring using that same secure metadata for creators to be able to label their content as not to be used for AI training sets. So it would eventually likely carry some kind of label if the creator wanted to, that would say, no AI, or please do not use this for data training sets, or whatever the appropriate language ends up being. And we think that the combination of those two things in conjunction with the wider efforts around transparency, which, by the way, aren't limited to photography. We've started with photography and we've made good progress there, but we're turning our attention to video and audio and eventually other file types as well. So really what we're working on then is a sort of a beacon or a lighthouse that will help people navigate what is surely going to be an even more confusing landscape than the one that we have already. And so that's really what we're focused on. Now, obviously, it remains to be seen how much people respect these labels, what happens if the labels are stripped. We do have some mechanisms in place to recover provenance data if people choose to interact with our technology in a certain way. It is possible to recover the metadata if it is stripped. So we're looking at that. But when we think about the way technology and photography have interacted over the last, 150 years or so, we've seen amazing changes. And I think that's normal. And I don't think it's possible to necessarily constrain technology. I think technology in many cases has a life of its own, but it is possible, I think, to put guidelines in place. The Partnership on AI recently released a framework for the responsible practices for synthetic media, which, it's very interesting document, and it was put together by PAI, which is another cross-industry group. And really at its core, it's all about transparency and not doing harm, and putting out some guidelines there that say you'd be well advised to be transparent and also well advised to behave reasonably and not to do harm deliberately. Of course, we know that in online environments, people regularly do harm. It's a very polarizing space, but I think I'm optimistic. I think common sense will prevail. A totally different question about how it impacts people's livelihoods. When you think about the stock photography world, I spent a couple of years here at Adobe working in the stock photography world. And, that's a very high volume, low margin business, but people depend on being able to license images at scale to make their livelihoods. And so the question then becomes, if you can generate equivalents to commercial stock photography with the click of a button or entering a text prompt, then what does that mean for an industry like the stock photography industry? And then, of course, the question is, what does it mean for things like photojournalism? And that's where, overall, I think the technology we're working on at the Content Authenticity Initiative will be useful.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Jeff, the other day, you said that the cat is already out of the bag when it comes to AI. I was wondering, what can we do to guide it into a better place for photographers?
So the platform operators are running the show, and we're all passengers on that train. And we might be successful as they have been in Europe. In Europe, they have the text and data mining Article 4, which says that you can basically opt out or reserve your work from being mined. We're not quite up to that here in the US, but I think that there are small steps that creators can take now. And first of all, Santiago and the Content Authenticity Initiative are doing fantastic and very important work to protect the future of our industry and art form. And I applaud Adobe and the others who are backing it, and also Santiago's work. So the IPTC Photo Metadata Working Group, the IPTC is the International Press Telecommunications Council, and the PLUS Coalition have partnered and are currently very aggressively working on a new metadata field into which creators can put a value that will tell machines not to mine certain work, and also to be able to opt out from uploading or submitting work to AI platforms. And we're working on that at an accelerated pace. When you go into software like Adobe or pretty much any software, you'll see in the file info panels or whatever they might be called in the particular software, some metadata fields, and those are the PLUS fields, the IPTC fields, and fields from other standards. And Adobe also was the first supporter of the PLUS Coalition and enabled us to develop and launch our standards in cooperation with the IPTC. But we are working actively with them to get these fields out, and then over the course of the next year, we would hope that they would be adopted to give people a very simple way of just saying, no, you may not mine my photograph. Now that doesn't help if your images are already mined. And when I go into the Lyon database, I see thousands of copies of my work, not dozens or hundreds, but thousands of copies of my work. For any photographer or illustrator or visual artist whose work has been published across the web, you can be assured that that work is all over that training database. And so the ability to opt out, and then also the ability to remove your works from those databases, is something that I think is important to artists, even if the work that's generated is not substantially similar to the work that's in those training databases. Those works that are in those databases are the fruits of the labor, not only the labor, but the creative expression of individual artists all over the planet, and they shouldn't be exploited for gain without our permission. Those works were collected under the guise of a nonprofit activity, but funded by for-profit entities to make that happen. And once those works were in place and collected, then the for-profit entities came in and began to exploit those works. And so, yes, there's nonprofit activity there, but you always have to look at where the money's coming from. And so we need to be able to opt out of those databases. And one of those things would be a global registry of works that allows these AI systems to check to see whether a work is opted out. Because we can put all the metadata we want into a photograph, but if that metadata is stripped, it's not going to do anything. So a combination of unique identifiers and image recognition and some of the technology that Santiago's working on are going to be the key. There are multiple worlds of photography, as we all know, and there's the photojournalism world, and there is the public that depends on the accuracy of the information. Is it real or is it not? Is that photograph manufactured? And especially and most importantly in that side of things, the content authenticity initiative is king and hopefully will go a long way to solving the issue. Outside of photojournalism, there's also the importance, I think, the growing importance of differentiating between AI works and non-AI generated works. But we have to recognize that in all workflows, in publishing and advertising and graphic design, works are altered just in the course of doing business purposefully, and it's expected that that's going to happen. All types of alterations. People are stripped out of backgrounds. Their heads are swapped. Their clothing is changed. There's, flying ducks and pigeons and pigs added to the background. That's normal outside of photojournalism. And each of those components, however, was created by either a person or a machine. And I think the public deserves to know whether or not, which one.
I could not agree more. I thought your comment there about a global registry of works is, well, it's a fantastic idea, and hopefully one day we'll see it. But I would like to talk about the opportunities that these AI image generators could provide for photographers. And I was wondering, Tom, there are photographers out there who are looking at AI and they're seeing a big opportunity. We've written about photographers on Petapixel who have suddenly put down their camera and are on their keyboards and they're putting in prompts and they're generating some truly mind-boggling stuff. Obviously, a lot of it is they take it out, as Jeff explained earlier, they take it offline and they start editing it on Photoshop and that kind of thing. What would you advise photographers and just people out there who want to use AI images for personal or commercial projects? What would you say to those people?
Yeah, I think you're hitting on the other side of the coin here, and that is a lot of photographers, a lot of creators are looking at these new technologies and trying to figure out how can they incorporate them into their business model. In fact, I was speaking with a few members who are going to be putting on a program next week where the photographers are working with their agencies and with their clients to collaboratively include AI-generated portions of the final images. I think that there's always a situation when disruptive technologies come along that you can say, no, I'm never going to look at that, or you can embrace it, and the answer is probably somewhere in the middle. I think that it is important for AI artists to understand that the work that's being generated isn't coming out of thin air, right? And these are the products and the fruits of the labors, as Jeff was saying and Santiago was saying, of illustrators and designers and photographers who have spent their careers putting these works together. And simply by virtue of the works being on the internet, they're now part of these data training sets. I do think that one of the things that is going to hopefully quickly come out of this rapid rise in technology is the set of ethical standards that AI artists should be thinking about. That happens both at the company level, where you have the organizations who are creating the AI, creating AI, and that happens at the individual artist level. Where you can work with certain databases that are already licensed. I was reading this morning about certain databases that are specifically designed to ensure that there's not copyrighted materials included in there, so that you can get some of the benefits that you might look at otherwise, and you can look at that and be assured that there haven't been infringing matters. I do want to take a slight step back, because I do think there's this other idea as well that we've all been talking about the future and how photographers can utilize this. But photographers, no matter which area of photography you're in, their core protections are copyright protections, and copyright law and copyright statute, certainly here in the US, is in no way equipped to deal with the challenges that we're looking at here. I think that's representative in some of the quotes we've seen from the Copyright Office lately, which you know, there was one case which I'm sure has been talked about in other panels. A certificate of registration was provided, and then a few months later it was reconsidered and it was curtailed as to certain portions of the registration. The Copyright Office is saying that, you know, you do have to have that substantial human involvement to be eligible for copyright protection. And so we've seen a number of cases where the boundaries of current copyright law are being tested. And here in the US, we are still working off of the Copyright Act of 1976. You know, that is in no way ready for what we're looking at now. So I think there's a lot of different options, but one of the things that we all have to be thinking about from more of a philosophical perspective is what's eligible for copyright protection. Not only have copyrights been infringed, but what deserves a copyright moving forward, and how do these derivative works fit into the mix of that?
Absolutely. Yes, Santiago, I was wondering, how do you see AI images being incorporated into the photography world? And I think it was Tom who said something earlier about how there has been changes for photography to photography since its very invention. Just how big is AI to photography? Is it the biggest sort of external factor that has ever affected the medium, or do you think it's being overblown?
Well, first of all, I heard a term the other day, which some of you may have heard of, which instead of calling photographers who use AI photographers, some people are calling them synthographers. Which is an interesting distinction, but that's, you know, just a label. You know, new technologies, when they emerge, typically have what we might refer to as a kind of a hype cycle. So something is new, it's shiny. There's a lot of, you know, attention paid to it, not, you know, for good reason. But then often technologies settle down, and then they may enjoy more hype cycles as the technology develops. And this field is moving along at warp speed. I mean, it's extraordinary. I was doing some testing, you know, I think about 3 months ago with DALL-E 2. I was putting in a word prompt for Golden Gate Bridge on fire was the prompt I put in. And it generated some, you know, spectacular looking images purporting to show the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco on fire. However, when you zoomed into them, they were very rudimentary and clearly clumsy and nothing. And then last week I put in the same prompt, and the images that I got back were extraordinarily realistic, like frighteningly realistic. They'd managed to capture the flames sort of curling around the pillars of the bridge. And certainly if they were published, you know, they would be sensational. But I think the other thing to take into account is that there are so many cameras out there. You know, everybody or a lot of people in the world carry a smartphone that has a camera into it. So when it comes to the world of sort of what we call citizen journalism or user-generated content, it's rare to see only one image of a particular scene. Right? Usually you see an image, and then shortly thereafter, you know, a half a dozen or more other people who happen to be at the scene capture the similar scene. So there's a way to kind of cross-check and triangulate. So I think on that front, in the world of photojournalism, it remains to be seen how disruptive and how important this technology is. And I think people are well aware of the dangers of it. Now, that's not to say that a, you know, bad actor doing this for malicious purposes couldn't be very disruptive and put some images out there that, could make stock markets move up or down or, affect geopolitics, certainly. And we've seen that in the past on occasion, but it typically self-corrects quite quickly. What does it mean for the wider world of photography and creativity? I mean, it's a big umbrella, as somebody indicated earlier. Photography has many different aspects. There's photojournalism, there's landscape photography, there's wildlife photography, there's portraiture, there's stock photography, there's commercial photography, there's macro photography, scientific photography. There's all different kinds of ways of capturing images for different purposes. And I think each one of those ways is going to interact differently with this technology, and in accordance with what those different areas are, there's going to be different responses to it. So I guess I don't know, in summary, I would say it's quite soon to be trying to gauge whether or not this type of synthetic imagery is going to revolutionize the world of photography in a way that some people think it will. It might, and I think in certain areas, as I mentioned before, I think commercial stock photography is an area that, could well be disrupted, especially as we're seeing, this technology incorporated into widely available things like browsers, search engines, things like that. I was reading the other day about GPT-4, which is supposedly around the corner, that is going to allow for the cross-pollination. And then also the creation of synthetic videos. I saw some synthetic video creation the other day. And video is something that in some ways historically has been a little bit harder to manipulate, because in essence, it's hundreds of thousands of still pictures in sequence. Not to say that it hasn't been manipulated. Of course it has, and it is possible to manipulate it. But what's this technology going to do in the world of video? I think that's going to remain to be seen. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's too early. Should we be worried? Should we be concerned? Yes, absolutely. Should we be thinking about this very seriously and looking at it as though it is potentially a major threat? I think we would be well advised to do that. And I think we would be well advised to put in some safeguards, whether they're legal safeguards or technology safeguards or other safeguards that might be out there to protect ourselves. Absolutely. How then this technology will respond to those, or the users of this technology will respond to those safeguards. I think I don't see the fire, as it were, getting completely out of control. But I do see areas where the fire might cause more damage. The proverbial fire might cause more damage than in other places. And I think we'll have to see how it goes over the next, and here I would say not years, but weeks and months, because of the speed at which all of this is moving.
It is incredible just how fast this technology is moving along, especially when Midjourney version 4 came out in about November last year. It started creating images that were startlingly realistic. But Jeff, as someone who is summoned to Congress to talk about copyright, it would be remiss of me not to mention the 2 court cases that are currently happening. There are a trio of artists suing, I think, Midjourney and Stable Diffusion, but much more significantly, Getty Images is suing Stable Diffusion for an eye-watering amount of money based on the amount of alleged infringements. I was just wondering really what your take is on those court cases, what you think will become of them, and what impact they'll have on the rest of the photography industry.
So the case with the artists, the case that the artists filed, I believe they're trying to develop a class to have a class action. And, as Tom mentioned, fair use under copyright law, at least in the United States here, I mean, there's fair dealing in certain European nation states, and there's versions of fair use all over the world. But one of those 4 factors is the usurpation of the marketplace. You know, did this use remove an opportunity for the rights holder to be able to license their work? You have, you know, is it substantially similar or not? And if it is, then did this copy, you know, usurp the market or pull the rug out from under the market? And I think that it's, first of all, you know, further advice to photographers is to add an offering to your websites, photographers and illustrators, add an offering to your websites and make that offering be to grant a license to platforms to make use of your work for AI training. Make that license offer, and also make an offer to license your work for use in image prompts. Put that out there publicly as an offer. If you're not offering that and somebody makes use of it, how have they taken your market away? So these are some of the important steps. And then also, Google came out with what's called the Google licensing badge, and it was really an advancement for visual artists, and not everyone knows about it. So they added a field that the Plus Coalition, my nonprofit, had created called the licensor URL, and you can access that in Adobe software and in other software. And if you put your URL in there, then wherever your work shows up in Google Images, it will allow people to click and go directly to your website. They'll be able to find you as long as you've put that information in that field, in that file. You can also put it on the website in the HTML code, but if the image is moved off of that website, that URL won't go with it. And you might say, well, how does that help me right now? What we're trying to do is to ensure that artist's work is identifiable and that people can get back to the rights holder. And so you need to put the stake in the ground somewhere. You don't know that there won't be a law in the future that requires that machines check the metadata of the file before you making it available for AI. Now to answer your question, so there's this substantial similarity question is going to come into play in that first lawsuit that you talked about, and I don't really have any opinion on it one way or the other. And also market usurpation will come into play. With respect to Getty's lawsuit, they have shown that their watermark or a version of it is showing up all over the data sets that are used to train AI, and also in images that are generated by these AI platforms. A version of their watermark shows up there. But what could happen in the end is, and this is hypothetical and I'm not suggesting it's going to happen, I'm not questioning the motives of anyone right now, but what could happen is a settlement that allows these companies to go ahead and make use of those works for AI training purposes and for generative AI. And I'm hoping that that settlement would include money that would trickle down to the artists who created that work and not just end up being absorbed by, you know, the corporation. So it very well could end up that way. We've seen platforms like DeviantArt allowing or agreeing to allow all of the work on that platform to be mined, in my understanding, and then changing their terms and conditions so that the artists who have their work up on that platform, all of their works, basically they were agreeing by just continuing to keep their works on that platform, that their works could be mined. And I think that artists need to be very aware of any changes in any terms and conditions on any platform that they're using. I mean, you get these emails that say, we've updated our terms. You better read them.
Well, I think we can all agree that's some excellent advice for photographers from Jeff. Thank you very much for that. Tom, a New York Times piece recently said that Washington is taking a hands-off approach to AI. And this week, the US Chamber of Commerce came out and suggested that we regulate AI as a matter of urgency, which is quite a surprise for a lobbying group that is typically anti-regulatory. I was just wondering, what do you think, what kind of regulation should be imposed on the generative AI space?
Yeah, I think that's such a big question, and so I'm only going to touch the beginning of it, which is to say what's going on right now. And I think what's going on right now are many groups, groups that all the panelists here are involved in, and cross-discipline groups from authors to illustrators, and so many other artists are looking at this and realizing that, yes, it is likely that many of these protections, many of the rules of the game here are going to have to be made in the legislature, right? In these various countries, as we look at the different ways that people are using the technologies. And so the conversations are now just beginning, right? And those conversations include things like what you've heard today in terms of Jeff, I think, just mentioned maybe there will be a law one day that says that you have to check the metadata in these certain fields in certain cases. But I think what the legislative solution is one that is going to come, you're going to hear a lot more about it sooner than later, because many different groups are already promulgating draft language that they are hoping the government will take a look at and implement. Here's the problem. I think that it's very difficult in general to get consensus on laws and what should be in a law and what should be out of a law. But when you have something like AI and machine learning that is so cross-disciplinary, but affects different groups in significantly different ways, I think you have a situation where everyone has a concern for their constituency, right? I think many, Jeff and Santiago and I obviously are looking at things through the lens of the photographer, but the illustrators have their concerns, and certainly the authors have their concerns, and the musicians have their concerns. And so it makes it harder to get a robust, universal type law passed, which is why I think that in the very near term, I think many of the rules, as it were, are going to come from these various court cases that we've talked about. And one thing that I think is worth mentioning, we've mentioned this Getty Images case a few times. There's arguments from people who are saying, all of the images that are used in learning training data sets should be considered fair use under this idea of fair learning or things like that. And right now at the US Supreme Court, we're awaiting a very important case, and that's the case of the Andy Warhol Foundation versus Lynn Goldsmith. That case is entirely about this idea of what is the transformative use prong of US fair use law. That is an argument that I think is going to, that's a result that is going to impact a lot of these cases now and moving forward. As we see what the US Supreme Court comes out with here in the next few weeks or months, I think they have significant impact on how we look at the idea of, has there been infringing activity when work is used in a training data set? So I will say that there are legislative solutions and there are judicial solutions. I have a feeling that we're going to get court cases that lay out some boundaries sooner than we're going to get laws that do.
Yeah, well, whether something is transformative is a very big question, and it is very difficult to answer. And as this is such a new technology, people are still wrapping their heads around it. I think that's fair to say. But Santiago, I was just wondering, you are obviously dealing with this authenticity program to find out the provenance of an image. I was just wondering if you could shed any light on whether you've dealt with any of the AI image companies, any of the main ones, and what you think their mindset is toward this type of issue. Because I mean, I don't know if any of you follow EMAD from Stability AI. You know, he is very bullish on Twitter. You know, he's certainly non-apologetic. I was just wondering, yeah, what's your experience with some of these companies?
Yeah, the companies that we've been talking to, and including some of these major AI, generative AI companies, seem, at least for the moment, to be interested in transparency, seem to be interested in labeling their output correctly, which is good. Whether that, remains the case and whether they adopt the tools the open source tools that we're building remains to be seen. I think we are optimistic, but, we'll have to see how it all plays out. The other thing I think that's worth mentioning here, when we looked at the sort of mis and disinformation landscape generally, which of course is relevant to the topic that we're talking about here, we identified sort of four main pillars. The first pillar is the pillar of detection and fact checking. And that's not an area that we're involved in because we do see that it has shortcomings in the sense that it's an interminable arms race and bad actors are staying one step ahead of the latest detection technology. But combined with fact checking on an ad hoc basis, it can be very useful to debunk images or ascertain the veracity of images. The three other pillars that we are very focused on, one is policy. And so Adobe has a very robust government relations team that is involved in briefing policymakers and lawmakers, not just in the United States, but around the world, to make sure that they are well informed about the status quo as well as about technology that's coming around the corner. And then the other two pillars, one is provenance that we've already talked about, which is this notion of determining the origins and changes to digital files. But the third one that I think is supremely important in all of this is the area of media literacy. And getting more sustained media literacy education into two different areas. One, into the classroom. And so to that end, we're going to be rolling out some media literacy materials aimed at middle school, high school, and university students for educators to incorporate into their curricula as they see fit. And there's probably a relationship between media literacy and policy as well, in the sense that one tends to impact the other. And then the other area is consumer media literacy. So, when we roll out these provenance labels that will allow people to click and see different degrees of provenance information about the content that they're looking at, educating those consumers about what it is they're actually looking at and its value, I think, is going to be very important. And the media literacy field is an interesting one in the sense that around the world, it's dealt with in very different ways. In some countries, it's very robust and introduced into the classroom for very young children, 4, 5, 6 years old. And in other countries, it barely gets a mention. And, I think that media literacy, checking the source of any information is, that's what I was always taught to do. Who's publishing this? What's their agenda? Where's the money? What's going on? Where are the interests? And I think that in recent years, because there has been such a massive flood of imagery into our lives, the digital revolution started it, and then the advent of social media. And so, we see more images than ever before, and we tend to interact with them as a society, as a species, very quickly. And we're looking at them on very small screens. And gone are the days, for the most part, at least in my view, where we're actually reading images and looking at them carefully. And I think that there is a lot of work to be done, valuable work, about just getting media literacy into people's thought processes. Who's publishing this? Why are they publishing it? Why are they framing it like that, et cetera? And so I think that's just as important as the technology that we've been talking about and the policy and the legal issues. And with regards as it relates to Gen AI stuff, well, that's, it's really important because now people have the ability to create frighteningly realistic images with a couple of keyboard clicks. So I think, none of these things in isolation is a solution, certainly not a turnkey or a light switch solution, but taken together, these areas of policy/law, media literacy, fact checking and detection, and provenance, I think taken together, and those are the pillars that will allow us to sort of address these issues properly and stay safe. Because at the end of the day, I think that's what we all want, I would hope, is transparency and to make the internet and the digital experience safer for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we can all agree that we would like to curb the worst excesses of AI if possible, because it does have the ability to mislead and just outright lie across the internet. So yeah, that would be good. Jeff, I was just wondering, what are your thoughts on AI images themselves? Do you consider them to be artworks in their own right? Do you see yourself teaching photographers about AI, and does the actual prompting itself, can it teach photographers about photography, because you use terms like a 50 mil or a certain type of camera, like a medium format camera that's used in the prompts to create an image? Can you see it being a help for photographers, and can you see it being included in photography courses?
I could definitely see it being included in photography courses, and I've been taking the time to kind of contact my peers, both to experiment myself and to contact my peers and kind of look over their shoulder as they're creating works where they will let me. And earlier at the outset of today, this session, I said, for some it's like ordering a pizza and you get it back and you didn't create that pizza. For others, it's like ordering a 7-course meal very carefully and getting back something that you're in semi-control of, but you still didn't create. And then there's other levels beyond that. There's all different ways to use AI. AI is not just one term referring to these platforms, as some people think. They think immediately of Midjourney or one of the platforms. It's fully integrated in various types of software, including in Adobe software, and it's very helpful to photographers in correcting and enhancing their images. So AI, in a way, is already being taught wherever any kind of digital post-production is being taught. But in terms of using these platforms, hopefully we can navigate our way through the very significant copyright issues. In fact, the whole generative AI is like a copyright dumpster fire in a lot of ways. It's a hot mess. But what I see amongst some of my peers is they get very excited when they put in a string of prompts and they get back something beautiful. But the fact that it returns something that's unpredictable has kind of a little bit of, I guess you could say, randomness to the result, even though they're putting in 50 millimeter lens. How does that 50 millimeter lens affect that AI result? Well, there was text on a page where there was a photograph and it said a 50 millimeter lens was used to create that image that's in the learning set in a lot of cases, and there could be other things going on as well. But what I'm seeing amongst a lot of my peers is they are going out and seeing what prompts work for other people and then building a prompt library and using those prompts to generate work. Is that work theirs? Did they create it? In a lot of cases, no, but in some cases, there's amazing work that's being done that's highly creative. And I would say a lot of that involves what happens after the initial generation. And I also see my peers going through iterative steps in the creation where they'll create an image initially, they'll upload multiple images and have those images merged, then they will give very specific instructions for adapting those images. And you're getting close there to the line of crossing over into copyright protection, where you are exercising enough original expression to qualify for copyright ownership. It's doubtful that uploading prompts and taking that first result or even some of the iterative refined results is going to qualify you for copyright protection, at least here in the United States. And that brings in the fact that you can't license something that you don't own. right? So a license agreement would not apply to an AI generated image that's not protected by copyright. You can enter an agreement with a client about how they can use your AI generated work. And if they then use it beyond the terms of the agreement, that's a breach of contract. That's not a copyright infringement in some cases. It's all fact dependent, obviously, but you need to be very careful. For example, if you go to Midjourney and you buy the upper tier, which is $60 a month or $600 a year, something like that. If you read the terms and conditions carefully, it says that you are granting them the unlimited right to exploit everything that you create for any purpose forever. Even when you create it in stealth mode or whatever you have, some photographers and creators feel like they're in this private space. They can go into stealth mode if they spend the most money they can at Midjourney and their stuff is protected. No, you've just granted a right for them to use it for training purposes and for any purposes they wish to, and to grant others the right to make use of those works. And in addition, we're talking about the stock agencies. Well, many of the stock agencies, of course, are diving in to generative AI to create images on demand because they have to survive and to maintain their margins or to keep their margins from sliding down. So those works that they're providing their customers with the ability to generate AI works are competing with the existing stock photographs, and it's kind of going to force the hand. If we had a crystal ball, it's going to force the hand of a lot of photographers to up their AI skills, and whether or not that's as creative as the creative process in creating a photograph is another topic. But I think some people are going to be forced into using AI to be able to compete in the marketplace. One last thing is that universally, my peers who are using AI say, well, this is a lot easier than going out and creating a photograph, getting the models, getting the wardrobe, safety concerns, dealing with right of publicity and paying the crew and everything. It's a lot easier to sit at your desk and enter some prompts. And I don't mean to oversimplify it, but to generate an AI image using the skill set that you've developed over years, decades in some cases, your artistic vision and your technical capabilities to kind of shape an AI image. It's what they say is it's a lot easier. And in some cases they say, I couldn't have created this. It's physically impossible for me to create this. I want to create an image that looks like it was done on the top of a mountain or underwater or what have you, and they don't have that capability. So they're creating things they never could have created. But as I mentioned, copyright is a very significant issue here.
Yes, absolutely. And as it keeps on coming up, we are in a new realm, aren't we? This is just a whole thing that just simply did not exist, not even this time last year. I am conscious of the time, but Tom, I just want to know, how do you think the rest of the year is going to play out? Where do you think we could be this time next year in 2024? How much will the technology have come on by then?
Yeah, there is no question better set up to fail than that question. I will tell you that I remember just being in DC about 2.5 months ago when we were talking quite a bit about all these various AI issues, and the conversations we're having 2.5 months ago are largely irrelevant at this point when it comes to what we're looking at, the changes in technology and the changes in policy, the changes that groups like all the ones here are focused on with relation to advocacy, right? I think that what we are going to see is a large contingent of photographers very concerned, and often rightly so, about how their works are being used. I think we are going to see some of the technology issues that we talked about today, including what Santiago has been working on at Adobe, what Jeff has been working on with Plus and IPTC. Those are going to be great benefits if photographers can start incorporating language related to AI in the metadata of their images. And for for the photographers who are writing these licenses and who are incorporating new language. I think that's going to be coming up in the next year. But overall, I will tell you beyond that, I have no idea what's going to happen, because it has changed like crazy in the last few months and few weeks. And so I'll piggyback off of what Santiago said, which was, we're not talking about years, we're talking about weeks and months when it comes to the changes here.
Yeah, absolutely. And just finally, Santiago, do you have any closing thoughts that you would like to share with anyone? Any hopes and dreams that you have for the next few weeks or months?
You know, technology moves forward, always has, likely always will. I think we have to think about using it responsibly. We have to think about being prepared, being informed. And we also have to think about how other things likely need to catch up with technology. You know, the copyright laws that Tom and Jeff were talking about, those were written a long time ago, and the world has moved on considerably. And so how legislation affects all of these things is going to be hugely important. But I also think it's important to be optimistic, and it's important to be, you know, positive about stuff and embrace change and be willing to change. Obviously, these things are going to have an impact on people's livelihoods. To what degree remains to be seen, but you know, we have to keep moving forward. And ultimately, there are likely positive uses for AI generally across a whole variety of things. And I think that's what we have to focus on, are the positive uses, but we also have to be judicious about how we do these things, how we pace these things, what frameworks we put into place, all of those things. And, you know, the community, the photographic community has seen a lot of change over its relatively short lifetime. And this is just another change. And I think it behooves us well to go into this change prepared and armed with ideas and facts. And, you know, eventually we'll reach consensus about what it all means.
Thank you very much. It's been an absolute education today, and I think there's been some fantastic advice for photographers within our discussion. So thank you very, very much, all of you, and thank you for everyone watching along as well, or listening to it. So yeah, I think that's a job well done.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Okay, take care.
Thanks a lot.